All right. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fix a Leak Week Virtual Workshop Part 2. Today we will be covering outdoor irrigation leak repair and cold weather pipe protection. We have brought in some of the most experienced and knowledgeable professionals in the field to help you tailor a game plan to make your home or business more efficient when it comes to water consumption. So stay tuned for the entire program. For those of you just tuning in for the first time, welcome. And for those of you who are with us for part 1, welcome back. We want to thank our partners, the City of Dallas, the City of Fort Worth, and the Environmental Protection Agency. We look forward to continuing these partnerships to bring you more awesome educational content in the future. So let's dive right in. Before we get to our first speaker, I would like to talk to you a little bit about Winter Storm Uri that we experienced just a few weeks ago. The storm wreaked havoc on all of our systems, from the electrical grid to our water delivery system. Grocery stores were short on inventory like bottled water and toilet paper. Most essential goods were depleted or inaccessible. Some residents that lost power experienced outage for several hours, if not days. Other residents experienced burst pipes inside the home that caused damages that are still unresolved and unrepaired. And of course, the most tragic outcome due to the storm is the loss of life due to extreme weather conditions. Now, I know it's Fix a Leak Week, and I know it's a Fix a Leak Week virtual workshop, but I have a question. Can I share my experience with the storm with you? Let's see, anybody in the question and answer, would y'all like me to share my experiences? All right, I got a yes. All right, excellent. So right now what I'd like to do is I want to share my top tips to boost morale during inclement cold weather. Morale is very important if you want to maintain optimism during these times. During the storm, like many of you, I lost power at my home for over 50 hours. Fortunately, my wife and I have a very warm blanket that we never use. Why? Because it gets too hot. Well, let me tell you, we were very grateful to have that blanket during this winter storm. It kept us warm overnight when it was only 50 degrees in the house. My mom also knitted me a scarf that I pulled out. Let me show you guys. Nice little scarf, wrapped it around my neck, kept me warm. This kept my morale up big time. Another thing, let's talk about candles and flashlights. If you don't have any candles or flashlights in your house, you definitely want to get some. And they're pretty cheap, but the types of flashlights I'm talking about are like these lanterns, like this one. You set these up around the house, and you're able to see where you're going. It kind of makes it a little easier to move around, so it keeps the morale up. Other examples, this is another flashlight I have at the home. I'm more into the lantern type of flashlights because these, you can kind of hang, you can set them up, you can stand them up, and they'll provide light for an entire room. Another thing, candles. All right, so this candle I got at a thrift store for 25 cents. And you can find them at thrift stores. You can find them at in the clearance section for very inexpensive. You should have candles all over your home. We have candles in every room just in case we have a power outage, so we can keep the home lit. Be careful when you're dealing with fire. All right, make sure, you know it's a winter freeze coming and there's a potential that you could lose access to water due to a burst pipe or for whatever reason, low water pressure. You want to fill the tub with water, but make sure that the tub is clean before you do so, because you may need this water to drink. I know one of my teammates, she told me that she used the water for drinking, which is drinking water, but you want to make sure that the tub is clean before you use it. another thing you use that water for is to flush the toilets, and it's very important that you have that water in the tub before something happens. All right. So during the day, we stayed near the gas stove where we had all the burners lit, and that kept us warm. So that really helped us maintain a level of morale, being able to get in and out of the heat. We had a gas stove. Of course, this is not going to work with an electric stove, but we had a gas stove, and it had an electric starter. So in order to light the stove, I needed to use a lighter once I turned the gas on. Just turn the gas on low, don't turn it all the way up because you don't want the flame to come up. And you should have lighters in the house. This is a basic lighter that we have here, but it works pretty good, but your fingers get really close to the fire. So I prefer this type of lighter, right? It's a clicking flame. So it protects you from getting too close to the fire. Plus, these can be refilled. They have a little hole back here where you can put the butane in and you can refill these. So we never throw these out. We constantly refill them so we don't have to continue buying new ones. All right. Speaking of fire, you always want to keep a fire extinguisher in the house. I'm sure a lot of you don't have one, but I got one right here. This is a fire extinguisher I keep right by the bed just in case, if it's a fire in the house and I need to get out, get my family out. I got this fire extinguisher. Maybe I can subdue the flame so that we can escape. If you look at this little gauge, the arrow is pointed up in the green. That means that it's full. I have the pin in. What you do is you pull the pin out and you aim at the base of the fire and you sweep. So if you have any fires, not just in a freeze, but anytime, you aim at the base of the fire and you sweep, and that's how you take the fire out. So I keep a fire extinguisher in the garage. I got one in the kitchen. I have one by the grill outside. So that's just something that keeps my morale high, just in case. All right. So another thing about having a stove, the gas burner lit, is you can warm some soup. It's nothing like having some warm soup. But you definitely don't want to keep the stove on while you're sleeping. You want to turn it off. We try not to keep the candles lit when we're sleeping, just in case, to be safe. So, but a cup of soup or a bowl of soup during this time that's warm, that you can warm on the stove, it's a great morale boost. It keeps the optimism up in the house. Playing cards. If you guys want to keep like games, any type of games that your family can play together, that's definitely going to be a boost too. But be careful when you're using, let's say you want to make some soup. Be careful with the sodium content of the soup. See, I was reading the ingredients on this one, and this 1 can of soup is 3 servings, and it's 44% sodium, 1,000 milligrams of sodium per serving. So that's 3,000 milligrams of sodium. So be mindful of when you're using these types of soups, because the sodium content and the sugar content can be very, very high. So what I do is I prefer to keep a lot of dry fruit around the house. For example, banana chips. Banana chips are great. Dried nuts. Apple rings. What's another? Raisins. So I keep all of those items because they give you quick energy. You just get a handful of dry fruit, some nuts, and you'll be good for a couple hours. It keeps your energy level up. It doesn't require you to prepare. You just make sure you have a lot of that stuff available so that you can continue on. All right. Another thing I want to talk to you guys about having in the house is good old hand warmers and toe warmers. All right, now I learned about this when I worked in the oil and gas industry long ago on the Houston Ship Channel. In my previous line of work, I was considered a tankerman. So what is a tankerman? Tankermen work on barges and the job is outside 100% of the time, right? So most often here, Texas weather is very warm, but we have some pretty cold days. If I went to work on a cold day, let's say 50 degrees or colder, no matter how many pair of socks I put on and how warm the boots I had on, after being on the job for about 1 hour, my feet would start to numb. The jobs went from 8 to 15 hours. So it's a pretty long time to have numb toes, and it's a very uncomfortable feeling. So I was told by an older, wiser tankerman to get some toe warmers. And toe warmers are made by the same company, Hot Hands. I wish I had a pair, but I don't have any with me right now. These are the hand warmers. And you basically stick them on your sock, and it keeps your toes warm for 6 hours. I mean, I'm talking like 6 straight hours. Your toes are perfectly warm, right? The directions say to place under the sock, but me personally, I like to put the toe warmer on top of my sock because you could feel it when you're walking around under your sock. So try to stay away from that. I would bring at least a couple pair to each job. So having those toe warmers in the house during this type of event is like, you can go to sleep, no problem if you have them on your feet. You know, it's no problem at all. The hand warmers are good too. So what I do is I'll take my glove. These gloves are Thinsulate gloves. I always try to find gloves with Thinsulate because they keep your hands warmer. And what I would do is I put the hand warmer inside the glove. So if you have a hand warmer inside the glove, I mean, they're safe to go to sleep with. You just, every time you squeeze your hand, it pushes the heat to the fingertips. So that keeps you warm. My experience, obviously, in my previous job is giving me a better understanding of what I need in extreme weather conditions to make sure that my family and I are as comfortable as possible. Preparation is key, and it's becoming more and more important. I feel it's better to have these items than not need them than to need these items and not have them. It's always better. Now, these types of items go from it's optional to essential during the winter freeze. Now, all of the warm weather stuff, we live in Texas, so when do you shop for this stuff? You don't shop for it during the winter, you shop for it in the summer. It's always going to be more cheap and more inexpensive to buy gloves, hand warmers. All that stuff is on clearance in the summertime. So be on the lookout, because what we want to do is what we've been seeing more often lately is FOMO, fear of missing out. You see people doing grocery runs, going to the grocery, buying all of the bottled water, buying all of the toilet paper, buying all of the paper towels, and all of the generators are gone, everything. You're seeing a lot more of that more often. So we want to try to avoid that. What I do in my financial life is dollar cost average. I might buy a little bit consistently over time, just buy a little bit consistently over time. I use the dollar cost average method to buy the items that I need for an emergency as well. Some items I'll buy in bulk, like that I normally use for sure, like toilet paper, bottled water. We keep bottled water just in case, but I drink from the tap here, City of Houston. We have a superior water rating for over 10 years, so I drink the tap water personally. But to each his own, obviously, it's safe to drink. Now, we haven't had a freeze like this one since 2011, about a decade ago. But studies are showing there will be an increase in these type of cold weather events, in addition to the increasing activity during hurricane season. So why is this happening? All right. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, a renowned climatologist from Texas Tech University, says climate change is the reason we are experiencing these inclement weather patterns. If you don't know who she is, you should definitely do a search. She has tons of YouTube videos and articles explaining climate change and its effect on our weather. Dr. Hayhoe states that the polar ice cap, which is located at the North Pole, is melting away. If you look at this slide, you can see that since 1979, 20% of the polar ice cap has melted away, which has increased the sea level, and it causes more flood events along the coastlines all over the world. So, what other effects can be seen from the polar ice caps melting? Well, let's take a look at this next slide. Okay, so on the left, you got two pictures up. On the left side, across the top, that red line, that is the polar jet stream. All right, so this jet stream usually stays in the northern hemisphere, but the picture on the right, you can see the jet stream takes a more southern trajectory. And what does it bring with it? Winter freeze events. It kind of creates more of a wavy pattern. So the jet stream is going in more of a wavy pattern. So that winter freeze that we experienced was air from the Arctic, just kind of coming out and hanging out with us. And man, it's pretty interesting, the effects that it brings to a city like Houston. I'm sure Dallas had the effects, Fort Worth as well. What type of damages do we see? Damages like burst water pipes, you know, that create more leaks, right? You want to go to the next slide, please? All right, so polar ice caps that are melting also indicates that the temperature of the oceans are getting warmer. So the oceans are warming, the sea level is rising. If you look at this slide, it indicates sea level rising substantially in the last 100 years, and the oceans are rising in temperature. So what does that create? Creates an environment for tropical storms and hurricanes to form more frequently. This means the scientific data shows, you can go to the next slide, please, that we will have warmer summers and colder winters as time goes. Kind of weird, you know, you hear about global warming. Dr. Catherine Hayhoe calls it global weirding. It's kind of her spin on it, global weirding. You should definitely check her out to get a better understanding of this. I'm not an expert on this climate change, but the more I learn, the more I kind of can see how it correlates with what we've been experiencing. So you definitely want to be prepared for these inclement weather events, not just cold, but you know, the hurricanes and things like that, by having some things in the home to keep you from, you know, going thirsty, to keep you from being hungry as well, and to keep the morale up with your family, because once people's morale goes down, it's really hard to bring it back up. So you want to maintain it as best you can in this situation. So if you guys have any questions for me, I'll be taking questions in the question and answer section. I hope I helped you out a little bit with some of the things I use to prepare my family for an event like this. All right, let's see. Any questions? All right. So let's see. I think no, we won't be going. We got Mr. No questions. Well, we got Mr. Patrick Dickinson as the first. It's going to be our first speaker. All right. So if we don't have any questions for me, let's go. Let's move on to. All right. What would you recommend for those whose water went out? Interesting question. I like that question. We have a few people that will be talking about at the end of this at the end of our well, our last speaker is from the city of Houston, Mr. Byron King and Mr. Carlos Flores. They are going to go in deep detail about that topic. And they're the experts. I'm really not an expert as far as that. You just make sure that you got water in the tub, because you need to have that water in the tub to flush your toilets. If you don't have any water in the home, or if you lose water, you definitely want to have, and perhaps you get yourself and we encourage a rainwater collection tank. If you get a 55-gallon rainwater collection tank, and you can use that water to flush the toilets in the home, that's definitely a big deal. It's a big deal. So if I don't have any other questions, we can move on to Mr. Patrick Dickinson. He's with Rooted In, and he's a horticulturist and landscape designer. Dickinson holds over 20 years of experience in landscape design and management, both in Texas government agencies and private companies. With an eye for design and a keen knowledge of plants, Dickinson designs creative outdoor living spaces that are not only beautiful, but easy to maintain with maximum water efficiency. His expertise of landscape, water use efficiency, rainwater harvesting, irrigation design, drip irrigation, and new technology. He often shares his wide range of knowledge by conducting CEU, continuing education, training for landscape architects, licensed irrigators, as well as nurserymen and rainwater harvesting specialists. Dickinson received his bachelor's degree in horticulture with an emphasis in business and design from Tarleton State University. He's a TCEQ licensed irrigator, rainwater harvesting specialist, and board member of the Dallas Irrigation Association. Dickinson has frequently been featured as a leading plant expert on the Dallas-Fort Worth ABC affiliate station, WFAA. So, without further ado, Mr. Patrick Dickinson. Thank you, Patrick, for being with us.
Thank you very much, and thank you all that are joining us this morning on your Thursday morning. Almost Friday, we're almost through it. And thanks for all those tips on that freezing weather. But so many people forgot about the outdoor water. And so once people started, sadly, some people using their irrigation systems, although it's not quite time to start using those yet, they were finding busted pipes, excuse me, and things like that in their landscape. So make sure that you're checking your irrigation system, being aware of what's going on outside. Most of our sprinkler systems are going off 5 o'clock in the morning, and you want to make sure that you're staying on top of that because you may not see a problem. And I'll cover that really quickly, but I do have a lot of information I want to cover. I get a few extra minutes, I think, because we're starting a little early, but I want to cover as much information as I possibly can. I know the speakers after me have quite a bit of information on repairs. So I want to address some things that we have found that are very helpful to certain people. And we kind of start out with some of the basics of your sprinkler system and how it works, how it operates. That clears up some misunderstandings about your irrigation system. And then we're going to talk about some things a lot of y'all are experiencing, like high pressure. And that's what I'm going to focus a little bit on this morning with you, is that high pressure situation that so many of y'all are experiencing. Let me get my slides to progress. There we go. So the reason that we talk about this with water efficiency in this irrigation system, y'all know it as a sprinkler system, irrigation sprinkler is the same thing, is because it's estimated that in Texas, in the United States, we use upwards of 70% of our municipal water that has been treated for us for drinking, for bathing, for medical. We end up using that outdoors. Our water treatment was not designed for outdoor use. We took advantage of it for outdoor use. And then that's kind of what's got us in this predicament. We have to remember what those sprinkler systems, what your irrigation system was designed to do. It was designed to supplement the lack of rainfall, not the other way around. So when we don't get rainfall or when we're in a drought, you can use that water to supplement water. There's a lot of keys and a lot of puzzle pieces to this that help you with not using as much water in your landscape. And one of them being watering less often to get a deeper root system, meaning your landscape is less dependent of you, and utilizing the right plant material. Many people are finding this out the hard way after this polar vortex that hit us with the snowmageddon, as many people like to call it, because their plants did not make it. It's still too early, so if we have questions about that, hold off, especially on your woody perennials, hold off till at least the end of the month to see what does come back. So many people were worried about loropetalum and things like that. Well, mine is starting to bud out already. I do have some things in my landscape that were hit harder than others, but for the most part, my landscape is fine because I was utilizing the right plants and I'm not overwatering. And that's the number one thing. We know the number one problem in the landscape and the irrigation system is overwatering. People don't know actually how much they need to water. And I'm going to show you some tests and some things you can do at the end of my presentation that will help you understand how long you need to run your systems, because most people don't know, like, how long do I run zone 1, zone 2, zone 3? Well, we're going to help you with that and give you some tips on how to determine. Most people think, oh, I run it for 10 to 12 minutes. Well, the average on a standard pop-up zone to get enough water in one sitting to where you're not having to water again till the next week is about 20 to 22 minutes, and most people aren't watering long enough. Improper design and installation. We, as a member of the Dallas Irrigation Advisory Board, we still see so many irrigation systems that are being installed improperly. A lot of times not by licensed irrigators. So if you do have major repairs or additions or adding an irrigation system to your home, make sure you're hiring a TCEQ licensed irrigator here in the state of Texas. That is number one, required but necessary to make sure that it's done properly. Improper scheduling practices. Think really quickly. When is the best time of day to water your landscape? Early morning. Early morning is the best time to water, especially your turf grass. The reason for that is you don't want the leaves or the water to sit on the leaves of your plants all night long. That actually encourages disease and insect. 90% of our turf diseases are fungal related. And when we think of fungus, we think of water, cooler nights, and if you think of grasses like St. Augustine grass and some of the common problems it gets, like a gray leaf spot, that's spots on the leaf that actually where the water pellet was sitting all night long, and that fungus started feeding on the grass. No routine maintenance. That is the number one BMP that we teach even professionals with our continuing education units. Best management practice number 3 is maintenance and routine checking of irrigation systems. If you had a leaky faucet or toilet, you would probably hear it or see it pretty quickly and have it fixed or replaced. But if you had a sprinkler shooting 12 feet up in the air every time you ran your sprinkler system, you may not know until you get that large water bill, and it's already too late at that point. The water's already been lost. So every month that you're using your irrigation system, you should be checking your system. There is actually a setting on most controllers that say check, where it runs the zone for 2 minutes, and you can walk through each zone and make sure that things aren't spraying sidewalks, that, excuse me, that you don't have broken sprinkler heads. You don't want it spraying on your house and your windows. So be present, be involved with your landscape and your irrigation system so that you know if there are problems. So a quick list of best management practices holistically across the entire landscape to help you be more efficient in your system. Number 1, water only when required or when needed. I will tell you, our soil moisture, even since our snowmageddon, has been fairly high. There hasn't been no need to run your irrigation system on your plants. And then, of course, we had those storms that came through. We still have cool nights. The temperatures cooled down again outside recently. And so we're holding moisture longer. This tool that you see is a moisture meter. This is something very inexpensive that you can get. This is something a lot of the cities hand out free at different events. You actually just stick it in the soil and it tells you moisture and how much. Obviously, you're in the red, you want to add water. If you're in the blue, that's too much water. And again, remember, the number one problem is overwatering. And so this is a great tool to have in your tool belt or in your garden bag to use it. You can use it on potted plants, vegetable gardens. It's a great tool overall for the landscape. Water slowly and less often and deeper to encourage deep roots. So what this is, you see the sketch on the right, as well as a live picture of some research crops. showing plants that were watered more frequently and less often, or more frequently in shorter spouts versus less often and deeper, and look at the difference in the roots. Can you guess which one is which? Well, the grass that is on the left right here, the real grass, excuse me, this is a grass that's been watered maybe once a week or only when needed, depending on rainfall for our primary source of water. And the one on the right is a grass that's been watered maybe 2 times a week because the city tells you those are the 2 days that you could water. They're not telling you those are the 2 days you need to water, just the 2 days you could water. And sometimes 10, 12 minutes on its own. That is what we call a dependent landscape. Those shallow roots are staying at the surface. They have no reason to grow deep because you're giving them everything they need at the surface. When you are pulling back and not watering as often, allowing the surface at the very top of the surface to dry out in between waterings, but holding moisture below that, those roots are designed to seek out nutrients and water for those plants. Allow that plant to do that. Allow it to be less dependent of you. 1 inch of water is generally recommended once a week to penetrate our soils down to 6 inches and no more in 24 hours. And that's only when needed. There are many different programs that your cities may offer and throughout the state, websites that you can go to and sign up that will tell you, hey, we had this much rainfall, you don't need to water. Or we had a 1/4 inch of rain, you might want to run your system for this long. So keep an eye out that. Every city has a different program, and I'll let them speak for their programs. But 1 inch of water only when needed, and usually during times of drought. So keep that in mind as well. Watering slowly. So many of our soils across the entire state, whether it's sandy or clay, introducing water very slowly is key. Because with sand, if we introduce it too quickly, the water goes straight through. With clay, if we water it too quickly, it runs off. So drip irrigation is something that can help with introducing water very slowly. Sandy soils, you want to add some compost to help hold that water without it going straight through. Clay soils, we add compost so that we can get the water into the soil. But drip irrigation is the most efficient form of irrigation that we can teach you. And I highly encourage you to look into converting or installing new drip into your irrigation system if you don't already have it. It is required in different aspects throughout the state now. All parkways and medians are 48 inches or less are required to only be drip. They can no longer be spray. Some cities have, like my city, Dallas, have taken it a step further and said 60 inches. So all parkways, medians, and parking lots or that parkway in front of your home can no longer be spray. They have to be drip irrigation, and that is to minimize, if not eliminate, a lot of the runoff. Adding mulch to your flower beds, 2 to 4 inches of mulch is recommended to help hold moisture. I'll tell you, if you put 2 inches out, you're going to a few months go, where did my mulch go? But if you put 4 inches of mulch out, then you're going to see it last a lot longer. Many different mulches, great mulches out there, hardwoods, cedars, different things like that. We always get the questions of what mulches would we recommend? Well, there's many out there. I've used them all in my landscape. The 2 that I don't recommend are rubber mulch. Rubber mulch is typically recycled tires. We know that has harmful effects on our soil. And then some of our dyed mulches. Some of our dyed mulches can be treated wood, but if it says something like, black, brown, red, hardwood mulch, then you're good. To each their own. Some people do like the coloring. I know my mother likes the black hardwood mulch in her flower beds. Water newly planted plants individually. This is key because many people don't know how much water their irrigation system actually uses. So let's say you have a new plant, shrub, tree that you're putting in your landscape, and it may be 100 degrees in August, and you think it does need the first season, needs a little bit of supplemental water to get it through the heat. And you want to came home from work and you'd rather just go turn on zone 1 and water it than actually take that water hose with the water spigot on it or the watering can, the 1 to 3 gallon watering can, to water that plant individually. Think about this. The average 6-zone pop-up sprinkler system, meaning all 6 zones are pop-up sprayers. If I ran all 6 zones 15 minutes, can you guess how many gallons of water I've used? That gallonage would be anywhere from 1,300 to 3,800 gallons of water. Depends on how many spray heads are in that zone. It's a lot of water. It's not just 50 to 100 gallons. It's a lot of water. So keep that in mind. That's where we get up to that 70% that we don't want. Water without creating runoff. We know you're going to get a little misting, a little overspray with pop-ups. It's the nature of the sprinkler system, especially when we have a little bit of wind or slopes. But this right here is runoff. As soon as your water starts traveling on hard surfaces, that means you need to turn off that sprinkler system. And I will show you a practice you can do later on that will help you reduce, if not eliminate, some of this problem. Check your irrigation system monthly because you get your water bill on a monthly basis. So now let's start with the basics. I'm going to run through fairly quickly on just the basic makeup of your irrigation system, how it works, the bones of your sprinkler system, because so many people don't know. Your sprinkler system operates primarily on water pressure. The only electrical part is from the controller to the valve, and that's just maybe 1 or 2 wires, very low voltage wires that's sending just a very quick signal. So most of your sprinkler system is all pressure, and some of y'all have very high pressure. We'll show you how to control some of that here very briefly. But your backflow device, there's different backflow devices recommended across the state. TCQ has a minimum standard, and this right here, what you're looking at, it would be a double check backflow device. And so this is where we tee off from your city line, because we don't want the same line that's going into your home to be tied to the same line that's going outdoors, because we don't want any cross contamination possibly happening. So this right here prevents water from, number one, going back into the city line, but it also tees off and creates a whole new main line to your outdoor watering. I'm pointing to my outdoors like you can see it. And so this is typically what it looks like in your landscape. It's usually going to be a green box and should say irrigation valve on it, a rectangle box, and you can see down in this picture those double handles. If you ever have a problem, a zone that sticks on, something your sprinkler system gets frozen on, I hope you weren't one of those people during this last storm, you can actually go out to this rectangle box and take one of these handles and pull it perpendicular to the pipe. Right here you can see it's parallel to the pipe. You pull it up perpendicular to the pipe, and that should turn off the water. It cuts off the flow of water to your sprinkler system. So if you can't get an irrigator out there, or you can't make the repair that quickly, or you are making that repair, turning the water off at the backflow can immediately turn off the water, just like it would be turning off the water to your home if you turned it off at the meter. You can see here the black box is the city meter, and it's running, the pipe is running this way, and we tee off. And then this right here is our irrigation double check. So that is where the water is introduced into our irrigation system. So your irrigation controller, the brains of, well, I don't want to say the brains because we want you to be the brains of your irrigation system. Your irrigation controller is where you make the decision. And I'm going to simplify it for this because so many people are intimidated and scared of their irrigation controller. The technology is something that we borrowed from, and we borrowed it from the alarm clock. You're setting an alarm for each zone to turn on, how long you want that zone to run. That is the simplicity of the irrigation controller. Now, some of them have become a lot more, I don't want to say complicated, but a lot more smart. We do have smart controllers now that you can operate from your cell phone, some that are ET controllers that follow evapotranspiration data. Some of them have their own private little weather stations. Many different options out there. Choose the one that is more suited to you, just like choosing the right cell phone that is suited to you. On that controller, you should, and it is required by the state, to have an operable rain and freeze sensor or other technology is what it says. That other technology is something like an on-site weather station, which has a rain and freeze sensor with it. But the rain and freeze sensor turns off your controller to avoid situations like this, because we hope most of y'all would not do this. And I'm hoping there's a good explanation for this guy out there washing his car in the rain. So that helps remove human error, where you forgot to turn it off or you didn't know those storms were blowing through like they did for us the other night. So this is a great tool to have, and it avoids a lot of those problems. And think of it like this: if your sprinkler system goes off and causes that ice to freeze that road or that sidewalk and somebody injures themselves, they're going to be looking for a liable party. And I will tell you the liable party will be where the water came from. So don't create a problem for yourself. Now, the irrigation valve, think of it like this. For every zone you have in your sprinkler system, you should have one of these valves. They typically look like the little valve box you see in the bottom left. And inside that valve box, you will have something like this, a valve that looks like this. And the wires that are coming off this solenoid is where the controller sends the signal to open and close. All right, that is where the electricity stops in your irrigation system. The rest is water pressure. So what happens is your controller sends a signal from zone 1 to turn on zone 1. It opens the valve, opens the floodgates, if you will, allows the water pressure from the city line to come through your sprinkler system and then push up those pop-up sprinkler heads or push the water out of your drip irrigation. So it looks something like this. Your controller sends a signal to that solenoid. It opens up that diaphragm and allows the water to go through literally like a floodgate, and the water pressure goes through into your irrigation system. That is the simplicity of it. That's where the electricity stops. There are times when these valves, over time, especially as they age, that diaphragm there is usually a rubber diaphragm. You can get debris in there if you had a break in your sprinkler system. The diaphragm can get a little bit rigid over time from continuous use. And so that sometimes can get stuck open. Sometimes it won't open, and that valve may need to be replaced. From here, because the water that's back on your main line that's coming from the city is an actual pressured line, under pressure line, this is where we recommend, unless you really are handy and do understand this, that you might require a licensed irrigator at this point to come and replace that valve for you. Anything from the lateral line out, when we don't have water in the pipe, sprinkler heads, I'm going to show you, you can change those yourself. And I believe a gentleman behind me is going to be talking about repairs as well. So pay close attention to that, because you can save yourself a lot of money by doing a lot of this yourself. And it's so easy to do. And a lot of irrigators, people say, well, why are you telling us to do that? You're taking money from the irrigators and the plumbers. No, we're not. The irrigators and the plumbers, having them go and replace one sprinkler head for you, cost you quite a bit of money, and that's a lot of drive time for them, and it takes them away from the bigger ticket items that their livelihood is based off of, which is putting new sprinkler systems in, replacing valves like this. They don't want to mess with the little sprinkler heads and things. Making sure, now from there, your valve puts pressure through the lateral line, and it starts pushing water out through your pop-up sprinkler heads. You need to make sure your sprinkler heads, the nozzle that's attached to those sprinkler heads, have what's called head-to-head coverage. You want your sprinkler system, your sprinkler heads, to have a water fight with each other. That way they're spraying from one to the next. And that's how we get what's called more of an equal precipitation rate. And also making sure that they're all utilizing the same nozzles at the top of the sprinkler heads. Have you ever seen somebody turn their sprinkler system on and every pop-up sprinkler head is putting out a different pattern or looks totally different? Well, you're not getting equal precipitation rate, and that's where people struggle, and they're like, well, it's still dry over here, and I ran the sprinklers for like 10 minutes, or it's too wet over here, and I ran the sprinklers for 10 minutes. You need to make sure that your nozzles, everything, are matching up. And I'll talk about that with some of these new sprinkler heads too, that we're going to show you for high pressure. Now, some of the most common areas that we see leaks in residential systems, you need to be looking at wherever there's a seam, is what I like to call it. So you can see here on this picture where we kind of drew the arrows. We took this picture of the sprinkler head. This is where you see the sprinkler head at the soil. This cap on top of your sprinkler head actually just unscrews. All right, the sprinkler head just screws on to this riser right here, and then the riser screws into the pipe that's in the ground. And then from here, this is your lateral line that's underground, usually about 6 inches below ground, is glued in. This is typically where we see the most leaks, and the reason for that is because of vibrations, because of things hitting the sprinkler head, people running over the sprinkler head. We've had dogs chew the sprinkler heads. So if you look at the picture on the left, you have your nozzle. This is that nozzle I was talking about, and that you can change out to making sure they're all matching as far as the pattern throughout your sprinkler system, the riser, the wiper seal, that's more of a rubber thing. These are areas that you can see water coming out. And I'll tell you, a lot of times they just need to be tightened back down. They've come loose from vibration over time. You just need to get in there and tighten it back down with your hand, and that solves the problem. You have to redirect where that water is spraying, but it's just a simple thing of making sure things are tightened back down. And that will save you a lot of money, because if an irrigator has to come out and do that, he still has to charge you, even though there were no parts, for his time. And that can be very costly. What do you see wrong with this picture? This picture might look pretty common or familiar to many of y'all that are watching today. We have a lot of this misting and fogging that's occurring. Sadly, some of our really older nozzles and some that are still being offered at some of the big box stores create this fogging misting pattern. Not something we want, but this is also a sign of very high pressure. Remember that the water that's coming from your city line is what's dictating the pressure in your system. So it's all that water, that pressure that's coming through your pipes. Could be when you have really high pressure, it comes through those pipes at such a fast pace, or velocity, I should say. It hits the sprinkler head and it hits it so hard that it comes out more of a mist instead of a spray. So we have to find a way to slow that water down. How can we say, whoa, slow down, let me let you all out at the same time? It's kind of like, this is I guess a good analogy considering our current situation, but you know, my local grocery store that I go to, Trader Joe's, you have to wait in line. They only let certain people in, and as certain people come out, they let certain people come in. So they're controlling the flow. A bouncer at a club, controlling how many people go in at a certain rate. People going into the club. That's kind of what we're doing. Think of it like a bouncer. It's like we want to slow it down. We do not want this high pressure situation. We could be losing 50% of the water coming out of your pipes that you're paying for, that is drifting away or going onto your neighbors or going onto your car and creating water drops. We've heard a lot of those different things that you can do. So high pressure sometimes can look like this misting and fogging. And again, what's happening is the water is hitting that sprinkler head at such a velocity, it's coming out of a mist. And so we need to find a way to slow that down. You need to test to find out what is your PSI. Your PSI is your pressure per square inch that is coming out of your pipe. The PSI that is typically in your home is the same PSI that's in your sprinkler system or coming off the outside tap of your home. You can buy this PSI tester at most hardware big box stores for $10 to $15. Or you might find somebody who has one that if you just want to use it once, you screw it onto your faucet, you open up that faucet all the way, and it measures the pressure that's coming out of that faucet and it tells you what your PSI is. For a standard pop-up sprinkler system, you know, you can run as low, especially with pressure regulating heads, as low as 25 on up to 45 PSI. The average home can be anywhere from 30 to 60. We've seen new developments in certain parts of some cities that can be all the way up to almost 100 PSI. And so that can be a problem, and it can play a lot of wear and tear on your sprinkler system, and it's where you see that fogging and misting. So how do we slow down that water? Some people will want to go all the way back to their zone valve. Remember, for every zone, you have one of these valves in the ground, a circular box. This little piece right here that you see that's added onto it is called what's called a Y strainer and pressure reducer. So it helps strain some of the water that's coming through your system where you might get a lot of calcium and lime buildup, you know, the white crusty stuff you can get on your shower heads and everything. But it also slows the water down. It actually has an inhibitor inside that slows the water down to a certain pressure, maybe somewhere down to 35 to 60 PSI. Maybe even lower if you're using drip irrigation, because drip runs off of about 15 to 25 PSI. So this is where we can slow the water down even before it goes to your sprinkler heads. So that's one way of doing it. And this we do request that you hire a licensed irrigator unless you really are familiar with your system. It also will change the shape of your irrigation box. So your little round boxes will now turn into rectangle boxes because you have to leave room for repairs to get down in your. And the other thing is I wanted to mention on your valve boxes, any valve boxes you have around your property, always keep those exposed. So many people say, well, I don't like the look of them, the green in my flower bed, so I just mulch over it so it's brown. Well, we sell brown valve boxes. Some people say, well, I don't like to see the little round green boxes in my irrigation system. Well, so I let the grass grow over it. Well, then you forget where it's at and you have to track and find out where that's at. And so many licensed irrigators do have what's called a valve locator, but you're paying for their time, like sonar, to locate that valve in your sprinkler system. Can be very pricey, very pricey. I moved into my house 6 years ago, 1960s house, and it took all day for me using a valve locator to find only 2 valves. And back in the 60s, they didn't always do the valve boxes, so who knows where those valves are. If they go out, I might have to redo that whole zone. Always leave those exposed, always be familiar with where they're at. Now, the other thing that you can do yourself if you do not want to go back to your valve is something called pressure regulating heads. Pressure regulating heads are now being not mandated, but requested throughout the entire irrigation system, even without high pressure. The reason for that is these heads are designed to put out the same amount of water, the same precipitation rate, or the same pressure for every head. So a lot of people, or irrigators, excuse me, that are putting in new systems, more smart systems, are changing all the sprinkler heads to pressure regulating heads. The reason they do that is they know that at every sprinkler head, it's going to be putting out the same pressure. You can see on this picture right here, this inhibitor that's in there that actually controls the flow coming out of that sprinkler head. So if you do have a high pressure situation, you can just go through and change your sprinkler heads. And this is something that you can do yourself. You do not have to hire an irrigator to do this. You just need to make sure that, number one, you're changing all the sprinkler heads in that one zone, not just one sprinkler head. You have to change all. So if you have 6 heads in that sprinkler zone, you have to change all 6 heads in that zone. Whatever zone is coming on, you need to make sure all the heads and all the nozzles match as far as the flow and the pressure that's coming out of that sprinkler head. This is something a lot of y'all. So this right here is that little bouncer I was talking about, saying, whoa, slow down on the water. And that's something you can change out. Replacing heads, even if they're broken or spraying, have as the illusion they've sunk down and you need to raise them back up and you need to change that sprinkler head, is something the homeowner or the property owner can do. If you don't want to do it yourself and get a little dirty, even hiring an irrigator, this makes you a better educated consumer overall. You are going to have to dig out around that sprinkler head and make sure that you can kind of get your hands around it to replace it. The other thing is you want to get all the way down to the riser, dig down to the riser that's below the sprinkler head, because you need to make sure you're not getting debris and things coming through the pipe. So you're going to want to turn that zone on and let water shoot out for just a couple of seconds to flush that pipe out of any debris before you put the new sprinkler head on. You change that sprinkler head, and then of course you have to change the nozzle as well. I'm going to tell you about some really great nozzles that pair perfectly with pressure regulating heads. Now, adjusting your nozzle once you get your sprinkler head changed out and you need to adjust. Here's the thing, you remember I told you the head-to-head coverage from sprinkler head to sprinkler head. You literally need to take a tape measure and measure from one sprinkler head to the next. And if those sprinkler heads are 10 feet apart, that means you need a nozzle that sprays 10 feet. Well, let's say you have a sprinkler it's 9 feet because it's just a weird design or a close area. Well, they typically sell sprinkler heads in 8 to 10 feet. So you're going to find one that sprays a radius of 8 feet or 10 feet. Well, you don't want to buy the 8 foot. You want to buy the 10 foot. And most of these nozzles are adjustable within about 1 foot. So if you buy the 10 foot, you can pull back how far that throws to about a foot by doing that little screw. This is the part a lot of people never knew what that little screw was in the top of their nozzle. You can actually lengthen the throw by turning it clockwise. What you're doing is you're pushing that screw down into the flow of water. So when you put your thumb at the end of a water hose to make it spray further, that's what you're doing with the screw. Clockwise shortens, counterclockwise lengthens the throw, clockwise shortens the throw. I was saying that backwards. I knew what I meant. I just wasn't saying it properly. So you can play around with the length, but here's the thing. When you're adjusting sprinkler heads and nozzles in your irrigation system, you have to adjust them while the sprinkler system is on. So I've had people say, well, how do I do it without getting all wet? I don't have that. Wear some waders, wear your bathing suit. I don't know what to tell you, but you do have to adjust your irrigation system and make those adjustments while it's on. So better nozzles. These are the nozzles that I love promoting and talking about. They go great with those pressure regulating heads because when you have you're regulating the pressure out of each head and you're then regulating the flow of the water, you're getting to almost like that perfect precipitation rate and that perfect pattern. Keep in mind that when you buy your nozzles, there's different patterns. So 90 degrees, 180 degrees, you know, the geometry you thought you'd never use again. 180s along a sidewalk, 90s next to the driveway and the sidewalk. So you have to kind of know the pattern. There are adjustable nozzles. So if you don't want to measure that, you can buy all adjustable and adjust it when you get them put on to the pattern they need to. And that's how you can get even more precise without having that runoff. But multi-stream rotor nozzles are 60% more efficient than the standard spray nozzles. So if you put these on top of those pressure regulating nozzles, you're going to be doing really well. And what they do is they're putting out less gallons of water per minute, about 1 to 1.5 gallons per minute, and they're putting out bigger drops of water. Bigger drops of water are heavier, so they're falling. So you get less and less of that misting and fogging. And I'm going to show you what it looks like right here. So you can see how it's rotating. That's where it gets multi-stream rotor name. And it's putting out those big streams of those bigger drops of water. All you're changing is that little bitty nozzle at the top that pops up out of the ground. And I like to point out to people, do you see any water drops on the lens of my camera? That shows you the efficiency in this nozzle and where we get that 60% over. You know, the standard nozzles that a lot of times cause that misting and fogging can be putting out in the upwards of 2.5 gallons per minute. So you're putting out less water per minute. Does mean you have to run your system a little longer, but you're also being that more efficient, 60% efficient. So you're not using more water, you're being more efficient overall. Drip irrigation. This is something that if you haven't considered doing, I would recommend you consider doing at least in your flower beds. It is 90% efficient. It is the most efficient form of irrigation we can show you short of just not irrigating. So easy to install. We do within Rooted In offer a DIY drip conversion class, typically exempt from days of watering. Some people like to see their system run. My dad likes to get up early and make sure everything's going well, and he likes to watch his irrigation system run. So it shows you that. Reduces water loss from evaporation and runoff contamination. But most importantly, it saves you money. That's the hook. And it saves us all water by being 90%. You're putting out gallons of water per hour versus gallons of water per minute. Big difference. We can show you how to convert an existing system or run it off of your faucet, exterior faucet. And if you're getting a new irrigation system, how to properly install that as well. The picture on the right is drip and flower beds at 18-inch spacing, and the one on the left is going to be subsurface. You can actually put drip under turf grass now, and it's very, very efficient. Similar to putting a pressure regulator on your valve for those sprays, we have to put a pressure regulator when it comes to drip because, like I told you, city PSI can run anywhere from 35 on up to 100 PSI. Well, our drip operates at about 15 to 25 PSI. So we have to slow down the water no matter what for drip. And so we have to put that pressure regulator on the valve with drip no matter what. Or if you want to convert an existing spray system, Rainbird has come up with a great conversion sprinkler head, where it no longer sprays water, and built into that sprinkler head is the pressure regulator at the top, as well as a filter. So you have a filter here and a pressure regulated here. On this one, it's in the sprinkler head, and it even comes with the adapter to connect your drip tubing to run through your flower beds. Super easy, very DIY friendly. Now, how long do you run your sprinkler system? So there is a test you can do called the catch can test, something as simple as a tuna can or a cat food can. Some people say I don't have cats and I don't eat tuna. I don't know. Get a chicken can or a chicken can. Put that out in your landscape. This actually, if you follow this catch can test, where you put this system, the cans out in your irrigation system, you run them for about 5 minutes and you look to see how much, you actually measure how much water is in the can. If you have 1/4 of an inch of water, that tells you you'd have to run 20 minutes to get 1 inch of water when needed, meaning when we're in a drought or we have not had water in a couple of weeks or something of that nature. And a lot of people are going, wow, 20 minutes. Well, that is the average runtime for a pop-up sprinkler head. And I will tell you, if you switch to the multi-stream rotors, you're looking at closer to 30 minutes. My multi-stream rotors have to run for 38 minutes. Sounds like a long time, but I don't get a lot of runoff. And if I do, I cycle through that. And I'm putting out less gallons of water per minute. For us in Dallas, that's great because of our clay soil does not allow or accept a lot of water at once. So those multi-stream rotors and drip are heaven sent for our clay soil. So a super easy test. You can find a lot of information online about the catch can test. We'll be putting out some publications and things on our website as well. Cycle and soak is for those of y'all that do have runoff. Maybe you live on a slope, or you have very compacted soil on your sod or something. Aeration will help with that. Cycle and soak allows you to go through where the first cycle that you run through your sprinkler system, because let's say you're doing the catch can test and you notice that after 5 minutes you're starting to see runoff. Well, that tells you can't run that system more than 5 minutes at a time without causing runoff. So the first cycle I can run for 5 minutes, and that kind of breaks the tension in the soil. It kind of dampens the sponge to allow it to absorb more water. I let it sit for about 30 to 60 minutes, or I run through my entire system first, 5 minutes, and then I can start back over and run another 5 to 10 minutes. And if I need to, a third or even a fourth cycle. And here's the key. If your irrigation controller does not have a place to attach, number one, a rain and freeze sensor, or for you to run multiple cycles through your irrigation system, it's time for a new controller. So many of y'all say, well, I don't want to spend the money on a new controller. I don't want to do this. Well, how many of these have you had in the past few years? I don't care how valuable you think Facebook and Twitter and things are. That is not a valuable resource compared to our water. So upgrade your irrigation controller if you don't have that ability to run multiple cycles. My controller I can control from my phone. It has a rain and freeze sensor, and I can run up to 4 cycles on each program. So I could run up to 16 cycles on my irrigation system. I could cycle and soak all day long or all morning long to make sure that I don't have any runoff in my system. So I hope that this is very helpful for y'all, especially those y'all that are experiencing those high pressure. Look into those pressure regulating heads. They're available online. A lot of our wholesale partners throughout the entire state, like Site One, which used to be John Deere, Longhorn Irrigation, Metro, they all now are open for retail for you to buy your parts. But here's the thing, they don't want you coming in and saying, this is my sprinkler system, tell me what I need. You need to go in already knowing how many sprinkler heads you need, that sort of thing when you come in. Tell them exactly what you need. There's many different brands out there. The only brand that does the drip conversion kit that I showed you is Rainbird, but there's many brands out there. Just buy within your budget. Nowadays, the technology and the way they're all working, they're all wonderful products. So again, thank y'all for joining me this morning. If you have any questions, or if you want to stay in touch or close to Rooted In, all of our social media is at rootedin.com or rootedintx. All of our website is rootedin.com. We'll be putting out a lot of helpful information as we grow. And then, of course, a lot of helpful videos, news segments. You can follow us and get a lot of tips throughout the entire season. And again, my name is Patrick Dickinson. And Ryan, I will open that up to if there's any questions out there that I could possibly answer.
Thank you, Patrick, for sharing your expertise with us today. We look forward to implementing the information that you've shared with us. Well, I look forward to. It's a lot of information. So if we have any questions for Mr. Dickinson, definitely we got the question and answer section open. So if you guys have any questions for Mr. Dickinson. All right. Is there a recommendation? This comes from Mr. Matt. Is there a recommended irrigation winterization procedure, or is it as simple as shutting off the controller?
In Texas, it is as simple as turning off the controller. Our soil temperature in Texas very rarely gets down to freezing or to a damaging part. Now, if you have like a backflow device that comes up out of the ground, like what's called an RPZ, you want to make sure you insulate that. Some people will even drain that out. They'll turn off their sprinkler system all the way back at the double check or backflow device to make sure that they don't have any problems. But we don't really winterize our irrigation systems here in Texas simply because our soil temperature doesn't really get down to freezing. And if it does, it's for a very short period of time. And our main lines are usually insulated well below ground, about 6 inches. So that's why we don't normally have to. Up north, their soil temperature can freeze down to sometimes a foot. And so that can be very damaging, and they do winterize. But I wouldn't worry about that here.
Awesome. Excellent. All right. So we have just a comment. Thank you. Very helpful information and at the right level of difficulty and knowledge.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, all right. Thanks again, Patrick. We appreciate you being a part of this program and bringing your high-level expertise to the Fix a Leak Week virtual workshop, and we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So we got about 5 minutes for a break, and then we'll be back at about 10:10. So be back at 10:10. We're going to take a quick 5-minute break, go grab some coffee, stretch your legs out, and we'll be back. All right. Welcome back to the Fix a Leak Week virtual workshop, day 2, outdoor irrigation leak repair and cold weather pipe protection. We hope you had a chance to stretch, grab a snack, refill your coffee. And I did want to make mention that we do have a survey for this program. You know, if you like the program or if you think it's something that we should make changes to for the next time, please fill out the survey. We will provide a link for the survey at the end of this event. Depending on what part of the city you're located in, either Fort Worth, Dallas, or the city of Houston, the first 25 respondents to the survey in each area will receive a water conservation giveaway. So we encourage you to fill out the survey, and that'll be available at the end of our programming today. So also carbon monoxide. You know, I did mention that we do use the stove to keep warm when the power goes out, but just make sure to be mindful that carbon monoxide is an issue. If you have a generator, you don't want to keep the generator in the garage while it's running or really close to the house, because those carbon monoxide fumes get into the house and it can kill you, you know, so be mindful of that. Just wanted to make mention of that. So let's bring in our next speaker, Mr. Mark Cranfield. Mark Cranfield is a Texas Commission on Environmental Quality licensed irrigator and a certified irrigation auditor. Mark began his work for the city of Dallas in 2017 as a senior irrigation technician for the Parks and Recreation Department, where he serviced and maintained the city of Dallas parks and facilities. In 2018, he joined the city's Water Conservation Division as a water irrigation specialist, where he conducts irrigation audits for residential and commercial customers as part of the free irrigation system evaluations program. Prior to coming to the city of Dallas, Mark was a service manager and irrigation system designer for a local irrigation company. With nearly 4 decades of experience as a field irrigator designing, installing, and maintaining irrigation systems, Mark utilizes his extensive knowledge to educate Dallas residents and commercial customers on their irrigation systems and to help raise awareness about efficient outdoor watering practices. So, without further ado, Mr. Mark Cranfield.
Good morning. Thank you, Ryan. Appreciate the introduction. As he said, my name is Mark Cranfield, and I am a licensed irrigator and irrigation auditor with the city of Dallas. I perform evaluations and audits on commercial and residential sprinkler systems for all of our Dallas water utility customers. So today I want to discuss how an actual system really works, how it's installed, how it's designed, and how it functions. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Ryan. That's our logo for the city of Dallas, savedallaswater.com. There's a lot of great information there. So irrigation system overview and leak detection topics. We're going to discuss system design and installation, how an actual irrigation system functions, irrigation system design and installation, irrigation system product identification and functionality, irrigation system leak identification, and how to repair a sprinkler head and a sprinkler head riser. And then we'll have questions and answers after that. Please go to the next slide, Ryan. Okay, let's look at this photo right here. This photo is an overlay of a typical sprinkler system and how each component is installed and how it is in line and connects to water and then distributes water. The first device we have, as you can see at the bottom bottom left corner, is of course your water meter supplied by the city. And that meter, depending on the size, is one of the factors you need to actually design an irrigation system. There's two things that you need to design an irrigation system. You need the water meter size, and you need the city pressure reading, because that can determine how many gallons that you're able to flow through that system, through that zone, and to your sprinkler heads. The next device in line is what is known as a backflow device. That backflow device is connected typically to a residential domestic water line, which supplies water to your home. And then it is set off of that. That is considered what's called a cross connection, or a lot of people use the terminology, a tap. So it's a tap and a set, or a cross connection. That will supply water to the backflow device and to the irrigation system. The backflow device is a device that actually prevents what is considered non-potable or non-drinkable water from backflowing into the drinkable water source. From the backflow device, a main line, PVC main line commonly, is connected, and that piping is connected to all of the individual electric zone valves. From the zone valves, it is then PVC piping is installed, and it is laid and connected to each individual sprinkler head from that zone valve. And then you have your system controller, which the wiring from every zone valve is connected back to that controller. That's how it operates it automatically. Go to the next slide, please. Okay, this is a typical irrigation system design. As you can see, there's your home and the driveway. Now, in different areas, you have all these little dots or circles are representing sprinkler heads. And then the little blue circles around them, those are called arcs. And that is the arc of the radius of the nozzle that is installed on that sprinkler head. And as Patrick, the gentleman before me, was talking about, he was talking about head-to-head coverage. This shows what head-to-head coverage actually looks like from a top view. Now, on the top left, top right, this is typically a spray zone. On the left side, where it says backyard, these look like rotary type heads because they're further apart, they have a larger radius, but they are still watering head to head. These here where it says water meter, typically a water meter is not installed inside of a home, not that I've ever seen. So it's usually out installed by the street or the sidewalk, and then that's where your backflow is usually installed, somewhere close to the meter. From that backflow, like I said before, the main line is run to each individual zone valve. These are, you can see these here, the little black and white circles. Those are zone valve symbols. And then the lateral piping from those zone valves will run out to all the sprinkler heads. Just kind of a confirmation of what the previous diagram was. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, irrigation design and installation details. As I said before, the water meter, supplies water to the irrigation system. The backflow device water supply is typically tapped and set from residential supply line, also known as a cross connection. PVC main line is then connected and installed from the backflow device to all electric zone valves. Then the PVC section line piping is connected and installed to all sprinkler heads. Then all sprinkler heads are connected and installed to the PVC section line piping. Okay, you can go to the next slide, please. Okay. Backflow device and electric zone control valves. I'm going to spend a little more time on this. I just wanted to get everyone to be able to see the overview and exactly how a system looks, either on design or in diagram. So on the left, we have a backflow assembly. This is a double check backflow assembly. It's commonly used here in Dallas and Fort Worth. The one in the middle is a commonly used pressure vacuum breaker, which is I've seen many times in Houston. Seems to be the backflow device of choice. And then on the right, a typical electric zone control valve, which, as Patrick was describing, has the diaphragm inside and the solenoid and how all that functions as he was describing before in the previous. Okay, on the left, the backflow assembly. Let's just talk about backflow assemblies for a moment. Backflows, they do what I had mentioned before. They prevent non-potable or non-drinkable water from backflowing and contaminating, which is considered a contamination, into the drinkable or potable water system. There's so many different types of backflow devices, and each one has its own specific function, which we won't go into today because I don't want to focus that much on that. I just wanted to hit the points on the backflows because they're very important and we definitely need them, and they need to be functioning properly for them to be effective. Okay, so the typical electric control valve, there's so many different types, manufacturers, sizes. It's hard to get into every single one at this time, but they all have the same basic function. They have a main line that is usually constantly under pressure that supplies water to that valve through the main line. And then when the irrigation controller sends the power to the solenoid, it allows that valve to open. And then in reverse, it will close the same way. When the power or electrical supply is cut off, the valve will close. Next slide, please. So as I said before, just so that way everyone can get it into their minds, backflow and PVC mainline piping and electric control valve functionality. The backflow prevention device prevents non-potable, non-drinkable water from backflowing to the potable, drinkable water source. And the state of Texas requires all irrigations to have a backflow device. PVC mainline piping, which is most commonly used for irrigation systems, connects from the backflow device to every control zone valve. These valves are then wired to the irrigation controller for automatic operation. Go to the next slide, please. This is a view of what an actual mainline control valve and lateral piping with wiring looks like in the trenches when it is installed. You can see the control valve there. It's wired to the solenoid. And then the mainline piping, which is located at the bottom of the trench, usually is the first piping that gets installed in an irrigation system when the trenches have been trenched and then cleaned out. Then the main line is installed to all the valves and all the valves are set. Then once that is completed, excuse me, then the lateral or section line piping is connected to the outlet side of the valve and it is run to all of the irrigation sprinkler heads. Next slide, please. These are common sprinkler head types. Patrick did mention drip. I did not include that in this presentation at this time, but drip is becoming much, much, much more common these days, and rightfully so with water conservation. On the left, you see a 4-inch pop-up spray head with a spray nozzle attached. This is actually one that you can find at Home Depot or Lowe's or even any kind of a sprinkler supply company. will have these. The rotary head on the right is a 4-inch. It's typical. There's many different types and manufacturers of rotary heads, but this is a common one used on many irrigation systems. And this is the one that actually has a larger radius and obviously uses more water, but it will throw further, which means that you do not need as many sprinkler heads on that zone to cover the same area. However, it's really more for turf watering than anything else, although I do see systems where they use it for other applications. Next slide, please. These are just diagrams of what an actual fixed spray head, like we just looked at on the previous slide, and a rotary sprinkler head looks like when it's operating. The spray head, as Patrick mentioned before, has a fixed radius nozzle. There are different types of nozzles, as he described. And then the rotary is usually an adjustable rotary sprinkler head that you can set the arc radius on, and it will fit, arc pattern, and then it will water that pattern consistently after it is set. As Patrick described before, yes, you will probably get wet when you're trying to adjust these nozzles, because it's really the best way to adjust them is while they're operating. Next slide, please. Okay, irrigation leak identification. This is a wide topic to cover because there's so many different types of leaks and so many different ways to try to identify them. So we'll just go ahead and cover these topics right here. The various type of irrigation leaks, main line and section line piping, like we said, usually PVC, especially on newer systems, zone valve malfunction, and broken sprinkler heads and or nozzles. Then you have mainline piping leaks, which are constantly leaking. And I will put this into the equation. A mainline pipe is usually under pressure unless it has what's known as a master valve installed on the system, which is commonly installed. It's an electric zone valve. It's commonly installed just right on the downside or the outlet side of the backflow. And that main line is run off of that master valve to all the other electric zone control valves. The reason why master valves are used is because it is wired to the controller, and then the master valve only allows water to flow to the system when the controller operates, which means that your main line is not constantly under pressure in a master valve situation. Section line piping leak. Leaks appear only when the zone operates. This is usually what to look for. You can also look for any wet spots in the area. Areas where grass seems to be greener than other areas could indicate a leak. And then we also have a weeping valve, excuse me, which is a zone valve that is either not closing entirely for whatever particular reason. It has debris that is not allowing the diaphragm to close entirely or properly, or the diaphragm is wearing out, it's old. There's a number of reasons, but it's usually a zone valve malfunction that is causing that to happen. Then you have a broken sprinkler head, which obviously is the easiest problem to identify because it's usually like we saw in Patrick's presentation. The head is damaged for various reasons. It's been run over by a mower, it's been chopped by a weed eater, it's been damaged by a tire from a vehicle, or it's just old and it's just worn out. So those are easy to identify usually. The broken cutoff riser, I want to get into a cutoff riser for a moment. A cutoff riser is a riser that is attached from the section line to the sprinkler head. It's usually commonly used as a cutoff riser. The reason why they call it a cutoff riser is you're able to cut sections off of that riser with some pipe cutters to be able to adjust the height of the cutoff riser, so that way the head does not be installed above grade, it does not stick up above grade, so it can be damaged. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, here's it's an example of a weeping valve. This is what I mentioned earlier in the slide before. This is a constant leak from a sprinkler head, and it's commonly misinterpreted as a broken head. But if it's constantly leaking through this head, then usually on a weeping valve, a sprinkler head is weeping because it's the lowest head on that actual zone. So when the valve is not closing entirely and it's purging water through that section line, then that water will flow to the lowest head and it will constantly weep or leak until that valve is either repaired or replaced, and that should resolve that problem right there as far as a weeping valve is good. But this is a good way to identify the difference between a broken sprinkler head and a constantly leaking sprinkler head as a weeping valve. Next slide, please. Okay, here we have some diagrams of sprinkler head replacement and repair. As you can see on the left, the cutoff riser that I was speaking of a moment ago is a cutoff riser attached to a section line pipe. It's threaded on each end, which accommodates the threading on a sprinkler head and the thread on the fitting of the section line pipe. As you can see in that diagram, it's able to, the little sections starting from the top, there's sections that you can cut that off and lower that to make sure that that head is set to grade and not sticking above grade. On the right, we have a completed sprinkler head and cutoff riser replacement. So that head was removed, the riser was removed, and a new riser and head were set. And as you can see, the cap or the top of the head is set just below the grade as not to be damaged by any mowers or vehicles. Next slide, please. Okay, replacing broken sprinkler heads and cutoff risers. There's many ways to do this, but basically you would excavate or dig around the existing broken sprinkler head and remove the soil or turf or whatever area that head is in, and then clean out around it. Then you would remove the head, check the riser, make sure that it is not damaged. Then you would identify what the damage is. If it's the sprinkler head, if it's the cutoff riser, then you remove the head from the riser, remove the cutoff riser, then you would install a new cutoff riser to the new sprinkler head. Then you cut off the new cutoff riser to place the top of the sprinkler head to the turf or soil grade, as I mentioned before. Then you would install new cutoff riser and sprinkler head to existing PVC fitting. Always note that it's best to clean out around that fitting entirely so you don't get any debris or dirt inside there, because that will clog up the head. When you're done replacing that, then you turn on that zone or station at the controller so you can flush any debris from the sprinkler head. Usually a sprinkler head will come with what's known as a flush cap, so that way you don't get debris back into the head, but you can still flush it. Then you remove the flush cap, you install the sprinkler head nozzle, you adjust it and set the proper pattern, and then you backfill the excavated soil around the new sprinkler head, and voila, you're done. Next slide, please. So I think I'm a little bit early, but that concludes my presentation for today, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thanks, Mark. We appreciate you being here with us and bringing your decades of your knowledge and the information that you've shared with us. If you have any questions for Mark, please type them into the question and answer section. I got a question for you, Mark. So how challenging is it for a person that's, first time getting involved in trying to repair a sprinkler head? How hard would it be for somebody to just replace a sprinkler head? Is it a tough job, or is it something that anybody could do? You're on mute, Mark. Right. Having a little bit of technical difficulties. Let's see. Try to get you off mute. Interesting.
Mark, to get off of mute, there should be a little microphone button on your icon.
There it is.
Perfect.
Okay, I'm back. I don't know how I got muted. So you were asking about how complicated or difficult it is to replace a sprinkler head if you know nothing about it. Is that pretty much what you're asking me, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, not difficult at all. It really depends on where the head is located, but typically it's installed in the grass, in the turf, or it's installed, in a bed, a shrub bed of some kind. It's really not difficult. It's just taking the right steps to do it, and make sure that the biggest part of it is to make sure that you flush, once you replace that head, that you flush that head, flush all debris. If you do not, then you're obviously going to have some problems. It's going to clog the head or the nozzle, and it will not be able to water properly. But that's typically, it's pretty simple. It's pretty common sense.
All right, we got a couple more questions in the question and answer. For DIY repairs on home sprinkler systems, does the backflow need to be tested each time?
You're talking about repairs on the system or the backflow?
It's for DIY repairs on the home sprinkler system. Does the backflow need to be tested each time?
No, it does not.
All right. And I got another question. It's a comment / question. I had 3 breaks on drip irrigation. 3. How to prevent this during a hard freeze? How do you prevent breaks on your drip irrigation?
Drip irrigation, there's 2 types typically. There's surface drip and there's subsurface drip. Subsurface drip usually isn't going to take damage because it's below grade. Surface drip usually takes damage, and it takes damage for more than just hard freeze. As far as preventing it, I don't really know of any particular way that you could prevent it other than mulching it, covering up with mulch so it has some kind of protection, but it's also damaged by other things besides hard freeze. It's damaged by varmints, critters, rodents looking for water. They will chew into that drip tubing. It's damaged by people digging in their beds and not realizing, and they hit it with a shovel. So it can take damage many ways, but there's really, as far as I know, there's no way to prevent drip damage, drip tubing damage from freeze.
All right. Any other questions anyone have? Let's see. All right, Mark. Well, we thank you for being here and sharing your time with us and your knowledge. And we look forward to teaming up again sometime and doing something even bigger and better next time. But
Yes,
thank
sir.
you very much.
Thank you. I've enjoyed being here.
All right. So our next speakers, we have Mr. Byron King and Mr. Carlos Flores. They're both with the City of Houston. And let me tell you a little bit about them. Mr. Byron D. King, Deputy Building Official for the City of Houston. He's been with the City of Houston for 30 years. Started as an inspector in the Occupancy Inspection Division, promoted to Senior Inspector, then Assistant Chief Inspector. He served as the Assistant Deputy Building Official before being promoted to the Deputy Building Official over Structural, Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing divisions. He is a member of the International Code Council, the ICC. Mr. Flores, Carlos Flores, is a division manager for the City of Houston Plumbing Inspections. During his 27 years in Houston, he has served as an inspector, senior inspector, and assistant chief inspector. He is a member of the Plumbers Local 68 and an active member on the board of directors for the International Association of Plumbing and Mechanical Officials. So we are very pleased to have you guys here, and take it away.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us. Today we're speaking about emergency preparedness for freeze and best practices. Next slide, please. Okay, so tools and materials to have on hand for repairs. This is just a simple list of items that you may want to consider to have on hand for the next freeze, should you need to make repairs, and plumbers being in a shortage like they are now, you might be able to perform some of the repairs yourself and not be so dependent on the plumbers making it out to your home, at least for a moment, at least to be able to make some minor repairs yourself. Under the copper list, you would have a propane torch, sandcloth and brush, solder, and a flux brush. Now, the sandcloth, of course, I'm not going to go into all the details of how you would do that and make the repair, other than just to mention that the sandcloth is used to clean the copper so that you can apply the flux, and then your solder joint can be made with the torch. A rag is to wipe off any excess that there may be after that solder joint is made. You would also use the pipe thread compound or Teflon tape for any threaded fittings. You would ream the copper as well prior to making your solder joint. And you would also need a tubing cutter, and then whatever other fittings you may need for that repair. For the galvanized piping, you would also involve some pipe wrenches, pipe cutters or a hacksaw, pipe reamer, pipe threader, all part of the process of making your own threads. And again, the pipe thread or compound Teflon tape to seal your threads when you connect the fittings. Again, whatever fittings that you may need, 90-degree L, 45s, couplings, what have you. In CPVC, it's a little simpler. It's a ratchet cutter or a hacksaw. You would also be required to use a purple primer and the CPVC glue, which is typically orange. There is also a one-step glue that you can use for CPVC, and that would be a yellow glue, and it'll say it on the can that it's one-step yellow CPVC glue, which does not require the use of the purple primer. A pocket knife, perhaps, to ream out the cut if you're using a hacksaw. If you're using the ratchet cutter, you don't almost never really have to ream that out. And again, with the same pipe thread compound or Teflon tape for your threaded fittings. And of course, the fittings that you may need, they're all going to be about the same pretty much on all the materials. PEX is a little bit more complicated for making repairs or installation. You have to use specific tools for those installs. You would also use a ratchet cutter. Some PEX piping use expanders, an expander tool that has a way to expand a ring to place over the fitting to make the connection and hold the fitting in place. Others have more specific tools for that use. And again, the same fittings, except their fittings are going to be insert fittings, barb fittings that would go inside the actual tubing. Next slide, please. Protecting your water pipes from freezing. We do that in various ways. Insulation is going to be your primary way to do that, which is going to be your pipe insulation, as you see in the slide. Next slide, please. One other way to protect from freezing would be to disconnect your garden hose from your outside spigot or hose bib and store it in a safe place. I've written in there your garage. That way it keeps your garden hose from freezing up with any water that may be in there. Next slide, please. This is another method of protecting from freezing on your hose bib. These manufactured hose bib covers, they are designed to fit over the top of your hose bib, and they lock in. Manufacturers make them in different ways, so you would have to read manufacturers' installation standards, but that's a good way to protect your hose bibs and keep them from freezing on the outside. Another way you could protect it if you didn't have these covers, or if you have something else attached to your hose bib, would be to wrap it in towels or rags, and then maybe wrap a plastic bag over the top and duct tape it, or tape it with some other kind of tape. What you're trying to do primarily is to break the exposure or cover it from the wind and potential rain. Next slide, please. Okay, another way to help make sure that you kind of protect yourself from freezing pipes would be to leave a cabinet door open to your kitchen or your lavatory. Let the interior temperature, if you have power, if you were fortunate enough to have power in this last freeze, then you were able to do something like this to allow the interior warmth to heat up or keep your water piping at a safe temperature to keep it from freezing. Next slide, please. Of course, the pipe insulation that usually comes flying off the shelf when we have an event like we did a few weeks back. A good way to tie it off would be with cable ties. You can also use duct tape, electrical tape, whatever tape you have. I mean, the main goal or idea is to maintain the protection on your piping from the wind and the cold air and rain. And you want to make sure that you get the right size so that the ends will meet and give it the maximum protection that you can. Next slide, please. Now, steps to help prevent freeze damage to water pipes when leaving home. We know some people that left home during the time of the freeze and did not follow these steps and came back to an awful mess. First step would be to turn off the water at your water meter utilizing a water key or a crescent wrench and pliers. So the other thing is you want to make sure where your water meter is. Many people, since they don't really have a lot of dealings with a water meter, they're not sure exactly where it's located. Typically, it's going to be out in the front of your property, near a sidewalk, near a curb, and then inside a black box or any other color box that your water supplier uses. Per Houston code, you would have a shutoff valve and at the meter, and you would also have one at the riser where the water comes into your home. So if you have those valves, you would not necessarily need the water key. We prefer that you don't use the city's shutoff, but in a lot of the older homes, older neighborhoods that have not had new water lines installed, they still only have that city valve on the backside of the meter between the street and the meter. that you would need to utilize a water key or a crescent wrench and pliers. Also, you would want to open all water outlets. Once you've turned the water off, you'd want to open all the water outlets, and that allows all the water to drain out from your faucets, your kitchen, lavatory, tubs, showers, and outside hose bibs. You want to drain as much of it as you can, and with those valves all open, it allows air to enter so you don't create a vacuum and everything can drain out as well as possible. Number 3 would be to shut off angle stops in the kitchen, lavatory cabinets and toilets. You would also disconnect the supply lines from the faucets and toilets, and then open the angle stop to ensure water drains, the vertical water piping drains properly. Now, of course, you're going to turn your valves off, like I said, disconnect the hose, and then allow it to drain once you turn the valve on, and you'll drain all the vertical drops of your water piping, and to, again, ensure as much water is drained out of the system as possible. Number 4, you would also shut off water valves at washing machine boxes. You disconnect the washing machine hose and open the valves and drain those hoses. We have had cases, and I've heard of someone that I personally work with, that the washing machine hose just kind of blew off, popped off the valve because of the freeze and the water that had frozen inside the hose and the expansion that took place. That again helps you drain as much of the vertical piping, because your runs, your lateral runs, your horizontal runs, are typically, you're going to drain those pretty well. The water is going to get trapped in those vertical drops in the walls, and this will afford you the opportunity to drain those as much as possible. Number 5, remember to keep all faucets or valves open in order to allow water piping system to drain properly. Failing to do so could cause water to remain trapped in the system, and then it would freeze and cause pipe damage. Now, this isn't all 100% proof, but it'll definitely improve your chances of avoiding any potential breaks in your water piping. Next slide, please. This is an example of what your water meter would look like. In the picture on the left there, you see the water key, and you see where the shutoff is. It's slotted so it would fit right over that valve, and in your quarter turn, you would be able to shut that water off at that meter. Next slide, please. This is an example of an angle stop that was mentioned. You would find these either at the kitchen or a lavatory, and you would turn them off, disconnect the upper portion of the supply line, or that portion right there where you see it's connected to the valve, you could disconnect it there, and then with a bucket or some other receptacle, open the valve and collect the water. Next slide, please. This is an example of an angle stop at a water closet or toilet. Same thing here. You would have plenty of access there to turn the water off, disconnect the hose from the toilet, and then open the valve again and drain your water into a receptacle. Next slide. This is an example of what your washing machine box would look like with the washing machine valves and the hoses. Again, you would turn the valves off, disconnect the hoses from your washing machine, and drain the water into your receptacle. Now, this slightly different here, because you see this picture and the water's point of entry is from the bottom of the box. So you would still have a small portion because that piping is going to make like a U shape underneath there if the water's coming from the sides. If it's coming from the bottom there, again, you probably would drain a lot of that vertical water out of there. And it's, I'm sorry, next slide. Okay, so as mentioned in some of the other presentations on a backflow preventer for irrigation, this is how you would drain a backflow. Now, this isn't a typical install in the picture. It doesn't depict a typical install for the city of Houston. It's normally going to come off your main water line that you'll find feeding from the meter to the house. But this will give you an idea of the device that we use. Now, City of Houston, we do require a pressure vacuum breaker or a PVB. So again, always turn the water off And the valves, if they get stuck, you can use pliers to kind of help turn those a little bit if need be. You would turn them at a 45-degree angle. And then you would also take a flathead screwdriver and take it to the test ports. As you can see that they're indicated there in the open position, the bleed screw. You would open that to a quarter turn rather, and allow the water to drain out through that test port. And then lastly, you would locate and open any drains that may be installed both inside the house or water shut off and outside your backflow preventer. So you can see the picture where the test valves or test ports there have that little set screw in there, that bleed screw. That's what you'll turn at a quarter turn, which will allow water to drain out of that device. If you fail to do this, you could potentially have a problem with that device freezing up and breaking on you. And then what happens is, if no one's home, that water is just going to keep pouring out of there. And what's going to happen, you get enough of those in a neighborhood, you'll experience some pressure loss, as I know I did in my residence. And then after you're done with that, you can close those valves up to seal it back up again. And then just make sure you cover it and protect it with either towels or pipe insulation, blankets, whatever it is that you have that you can wrap around there. And that'll ensure that you're doing the best you can to try to keep from having this system freeze up on you. Next slide, please. Okay, again, be sure to cut off or shut off your water before proceeding to draining the pressure vacuum breaker. You want to make sure that you do that correctly. And there's the valves again in the quarter turn position to try to allow air to enter and to also let the system drain out properly. Next slide. Okay, tips to thaw a frozen water pipe. Now, things to keep in mind: if you've done everything that has been mentioned, you still may experience a water line that freezes. I know in my residence we did have one cold water line on the kitchen side that had frozen, and we just basically, the temperature rose to a point during the day where that just kind of thawed out on its own. So that's an option. But if you can locate the frozen pipe, that's going to be key, obviously. And then you keep your faucet open, and then you would begin near the faucet to try to warm things up. And that you could do that by, again, leaving the cabinets open and let the interior warmth naturally thaw out that piping. You could also use a hair dryer. Hot towels. I mean, if you have a way to warm up towels, anything that's going to generate some warmth to put on there to slowly thaw it out. You don't want to just rapidly put some extreme heat on there. You might find some problems arising from that. You can also use a portable space heater or a heat lamp. And if you can find some electrical heat tape and have that on hand, and you have access to the piping to do so, you can affix the electrical tape to your water piping, and that'll help thaw it out for you, thaw the piping out for you. Now, big key here though is you want to avoid using an open flame. For obvious reasons, if you use an open flame in a very tight area or inside your cabinets or in the attic somewhere, if you're not careful, you could cause a fire and just exacerbate the issue. Next slide, please. And I'm open for questions now.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. King and Mr. Flores. We got a couple of questions for you guys too. So I think this first question, I don't know if you'll be able to answer this one, but it might have been for Mark, but we'll skip that one and I'll get to this one more pertinent to your presentation. How do you shut off water if you're on a well water system?
Well, your well water, your tank, your well there is going to have some shut-off valves, or should have them at the tank itself. Now, being that we don't deal with well systems here in Houston very much, I'm not going to be well versed enough to give you that kind of answer, but there should be some valves and there should be what I would consider a bleed valve or a spigot close enough to that same point to drain it down. Also, you should have a backflow preventer of some sort there to protect the water aquifer. And so from that valve itself, you could also shut the water off and drain it much in the way that you would the pressure vacuum breaker that I had in one of the slides.
Awesome. Thank you. So another question. Would you recommend bib covers or dripping faucets?
Well, there's two trains of thoughts, obviously. A lot of people say let your water drain, at least let it drip. And if you let it drip, they say to let it drip. Let the cold water drain from the meter to the most remote outlet. And then the hot side, you would let it from the water heater to the most remote outlet on the hot side. And a lot of people say let it drip, and that way moving water cannot freeze. That's not always the case. And not to mention, you're wasting a valuable resource in the water. And I realize at that point, a lot of people aren't really concerned about what their water bill may be. But you also, if you take the steps and drain the system down as much as possible, and you have electricity, leaving the water off would probably be the best way to do it, because you're gonna deplete the pressure. If everybody in the city did something like that, you're going to diminish the water pressure that's already been built up and there's a potential to experience low water pressure. Plus you exacerbate the city's or your municipality's water pumps. They'll have to be working constantly to try to maintain that pressure, and they never get a break because the static pressure wouldn't be reached. So, you kind of do what you got to do, but we really prefer that you don't run the faucets. Try to cover everything to the best of your ability.
All right. Got a couple more questions for you guys. All right. So if the main water line is turned off, does the water tank heater need to be turned off? And if the water heater is not turned off, should the hot water faucets be opened?
I'm sorry, repeat that question again.
Yeah, it's a lot to it. If the main water line is turned off, does the water tank heater need to be turned off? And if the water heater is not turned off, should the hot water faucets be opened?
Okay, that's a little bit involved. On a gas water heater, and it's a tank type, it's really not going to drain your tank. If you turn the water on or off and you drain everything else down, your tank will hold water, especially if it's a top-fed water heater. So it won't really drain the water heater out. Electric heaters with side inlets, you would want to turn your power off to those, because if those could potentially drain down, and if they do, then you'll burn up your elements. Tankless water heaters, you would probably want to turn those off as well, because they're driven by the water pressure. So if it's not having any water pressure, it's not going to come on. And there again, tank type water heater, your electric water heaters, you can go in and lower those down. Like your tank type gas water heater, you could, on the unitrol, on the control valve for it, you could turn that to pilot, and you're not wasting any gas unnecessarily. The electrics, you can always go to those and lower the temperature on the thermostat. But most residential water heaters that are electric are going to have top inlet and outlets. So those, you don't really run a risk of those draining down. So shutting off the water and leaving the valves open, I don't see where that would pose a problem for the most part. Your tankless, like I say, those are a little more specialized. They get error codes if they don't have certain pressures and other things going on with them. So you may want to cut those off completely. But you want to leave the valves open so the water heater can drain as much as possible on the tank type.
All right, and one more question for you guys. If an angle stop leaks when you turn off the water, can that be corrected as a simple DIY fix with a few YouTube videos, or is that a plumber type of call?
That is definitely something you can do yourself. And it depends on where the leak is. A lot of times angle stops are meant to be turned on in the on position all the way to where it stops. And then when you turn them off, obviously you're tightening them all down. But once you go to disturb that valve and you go to close it, a lot of times it will leak out of the stem, which is the portion that's sticking out that the handle attaches to. And usually there's a packing nut there on the outside. If they can go back, I don't know if they can do this, but if they can get back to the slide that showed the angle stop. That one, the lavatory one more. Okay,
Right there.
so you'll see the handle itself is kind of oblong. You'll see the part in the middle that's cylindrical, and then you'll see that nut on the outside there. That is the packing nut. So if by turning it on and off, you kind of move that packing in there a little bit, it may cause a leak at that point. All you have to do is take a pair of pliers and tighten it up, and 9 times out of 10, that's going to resolve that issue. If it's leaking because the valve is not actually turning the water off, and there's maybe some trash, or the valve has been etched on the inside by the water, making that, or with the erosion, making that a cut in there that's not making it seal all the way, then in this particular picture here, depends on your personal skills. This one is a soldered on valve onto copper, so you would have to take a torch and solder flux and the whole 9 yards on that one. But if it's typically one that screws onto the screw type, the female thread type that screws onto male threads on a pipe, with a couple of with a pipe wrench and pliers, it's just a matter of turning the water off outside and backing off or unscrewing the valve from the piping, using that same pipe compound you apply that to the male threads, and then you can screw the new valve on. So that's definitely something somebody can do with the help of YouTube.
Awesome. All right. I got one more question, but I don't know if you can answer this. I think it's a sprinkler head question. Can you replace a 4-inch riser with a permanent 12-inch riser that sticks out of the ground?
Well, along those lines, I mean, you can do that on an irrigation system. However, and I'll answer it from the plumbing aspect, because I do know they sell different riser lengths that you can do, like for shrub sprayers. But when you do that, the effect that it's going to have on the plumbing is the pressure vacuum breaker has a marked critical level near the base of the valve itself, and that level has to be maintained 12 inches above the highest sprinkler head. So if you have a shrub sprayer that went from 12 and you're in compliance at that point, and you put something longer that encroaches into that area of the 12-inch clearance, then you'd have to call someone out to have them raise that pressure vacuum breaker and get it retested and certified at that point. But yeah, that if I'm not mistaken, that can be done, but it also causes an effect to the install of the pressure vacuum breaker.
So even if let's say you decided to replace all of them with the longer one, would that remedy that issue, or do you still have to get that?
You still have to, because the pressure vacuum breaker, like I said, has a critical level, and it'll be marked with a CL. Typically, it's kind of etched into the valve itself. So from that line, 12 inches below, you're not supposed to have any of those sprinkler heads come up to that level. So like I say, if you're increasing the height of your shrub sprayers, you may want to also consider raising the level of your backflow preventer. In the city of Houston, like I say, we use the pressure vacuum breakers. I know earlier there was a double check that was shown in the ground, and those we have a little different requirement here.
Awesome. All right. Do you guys have anything else y'all like to share?
You know, given the way this last freeze event that we had, I'm not sure that any of these, you know, a lot of people did all this, and with the freeze that we had, the temperatures that we reached, and a lot of people that with the issue of not having power, you know, some of these steps that I've mentioned probably are not going to be helpful if you don't have power. But you know, on a basic level, these are your basic things to do to help protect, especially if you know you're not going to be home. Ideally, that you want to follow those steps and drain as much of it and save yourself a big headache. Because I know some people that came home and whole ceilings were down on the ground, on the floor.
Right. One of the a lot of problems that we have with people here in Houston was that they left or they left to go out of town, and when our inspectors went out to check for the leaks, or because the problem we had was we had so many leaks in the city of Houston that with all the plumbing leaks that we had, that eliminated the water that everyone in Houston had. So what we were doing was actually going out and actually turning the water off either at the house or at the shut-off valve at the house or at the water meter in order to get the water pressure back for the city of Houston. But the majority of the leaks that we had were either underneath the house, inside the walls where there were no insulation, or up in the attic. And so when people came back home, that's where all the damage was, and that's what we're still going through now.
Thank you guys for being with us today. We greatly appreciate y'all being here and, adding your expertise to this event. And I look forward to connecting with y'all in the future for future events.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. So we're almost to the end of our programming today. But first, I want to talk about our partners over at Fort Worth. They have some things on the horizon. Fort Worth Water Conservation offers a comprehensive program to address indoor and outdoor water conservation. Their water conservation plan, updated every 5 years, sets conservation goals for residential daily use and per capita daily use. They have recently added new website information on the continuous usage detection and irrigation calculator tool to help customers understand the water saving and cost impacts of leaks and outdoor use. Their programs include summer running residential and commercial toilet replacement programs, free sprinkler evaluations, water audits for business customers, and their new minor leak repair program for low-income homeowners. They have partnered with regional conservation partners this year to offer 24 virtual and/or in-person classes and workshops to help their customers better understand the value of saving water while maintaining the beauty of their outdoor spaces. All of this information is available at savefortworthwater.org, savefortworthwater.org, and their social media channels in English and Spanish. So let's move on to our partners over at the City of Dallas. City of Dallas Water Conservation offers a menu of incentive-based programs in education and outreach initiatives aimed at raising awareness about the importance of conserving water and at providing resources that promote efficient water use practices. Two programs they want to highlight today are the Minor Plumbing Repair Program, which helps City of Dallas residents address minor leaks in their homes, and the Free Irrigation System Evaluation Program, which provides City of Dallas residents a free audit of their irrigation systems to identify leaks, broken sprinkler heads, and other issues like irrigation runoff. Residents also receive information on more efficient ways to water their lawns. In addition to their other outreach and education initiatives, they offer free year-round water-wise seminars and workshops in collaboration with Rooted In. Their next virtual seminar is all about foodscaping and is sculpted for Saturday, April 17th at 10 a.m. They're partnering with Rooted In to promote their Grow and Go box gardens. These box gardens take the guesswork out of finding the right plant for the right spot with perfect water-saving combinations. You can pre-order now through April 5th or until supplies last. City of Dallas Water Conservation is hosting one of 5 pickup locations around Dallas-Fort Worth on April 10th from 8 a.m. to 11 a.m. So you want to visit SaveDallasWater.com for more information. That's SaveDallasWater.com. All right. So the city of Houston, we want to talk about our education programs that we have. All right. Some of the events that we've done in the past and that we are doing in the future, our Waterworks Festival. We had to delay the Waterworks Festival. We had to postpone it this year due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Imagine a Day Without Water. We've recently won a few awards for our Imagine a Day Without Water essay competition that we will continue. That's in October. And of course, our Fix a Leak Week workshop, which is what you're attending today. We also have a rain barrel and compost bin sale. Let me tell you a little about the rain barrel sale. It's coming up on May 25th, 2021. We'll be selling 50-gallon Ivy rain barrels at a 40% discounted price, $72 for anyone interested in purchasing a barrel, and an even further discounted rate of $52 a barrel to Houston Water customers while supplies last. Visit rainbarrelprogram.org/Houston to learn more and purchase your barrel. We will also put the link in the question and answer of this event. All right, we have a survey for this workshop, which will be, Sarah put it in the link earlier, and we'd love for you to fill out the survey. We encourage you to fill out the survey. All of our registrants will receive a link, well, in the email after this event as well. So the first 25 attendees from each metropolitan area that fill out a survey will receive a water conservation giveaway. So if you're in Fort Worth and you're one of the first in the Fort Worth area to fill out the survey, you will receive a water conservation giveaway from the Fort Worth area. Same thing for Dallas. If you're in Dallas and you fill out the survey and you're one of the first 25 to do so, you will receive a giveaway from the city of Dallas. If you're joining us from somewhere outside and you are one of the somewhere outside of the city of Dallas, the city of Fort Worth, or the city of Houston, you know, we will get your information and we'll send you some type of giveaway if you're in the first 25. So we want you to definitely do that. The supplies are limited, so you know the first ones that get in will be able to get that conservation giveaway. We want to thank all of our speakers today, Mr. Patrick Livingston, Dickinson, Mr. Patrick Dickinson, sorry about that, with Rooted In, Mr. Mark Cranfield with the City of Dallas, Mr. Byron King with the City of Houston, and Mr. Carlos Flores with the City of Houston. Special thanks go out to Megan Tufan and her entire City of Dallas team, as well as Becky Begley and the entire City of Fort Worth team, working so hard to help us put this program together. I also want to thank Environmental Protection Agency, most notably Beth Livingston, for her contributions to this program. Lastly, I want to thank the Houston Water Conservation Team, Paula Pascheray, Sarah Robinson, and Gail Kaufman for working so hard behind the scenes to make this program great. And of course, thank you to all of the attendees. We hope you are more knowledgeable about the subject matter and feel empowered to take charge and tackle those leaks. We look forward to doing this again next year, perhaps sooner, and perhaps in person, but only time will tell. Thank you for joining us and have a great day. And I'm gonna kind of stick around here for a little bit if you guys want to ask any questions or if you have any comments, but we greatly appreciate y'all being a part of this and coming out and making this a wonderful event. Hey, Sarah, can we share that survey link one more time for the attendees, just in case they missed it, please?
Yes, it's the most recent link in the chat. I just sent it out 2 minutes ago, but I can send it again. Here we go.
Excellent. Thank you very much. All right. So, do any of the presenters have anything else they might want to share? You know how you go to a movie and you watch the credits, and then after the credits, it's like a little scene at the end. Anybody got any bonus content that they'd like to share? All right. Excellent. Well, what do you think, Tara? You think we should go ahead and conclude this event?
Sounds great to me. We've got a couple of thank yous coming in. Thank you for that, and thank you to all of our presenters today for some wonderful content as well. And with that, I will go ahead and end the meeting. I'll end it for all. So thank you all for your attendance today, and we look forward to hearing back from you in this survey soon.
Thank you, guys.